Welcome to the book club where the size is just right, the books aren't too long, and you never need to host. That's our job. We bring best-selling and award-winning writers of every genre to Twin Cities metro area libraries to share their stories, discuss their work, and answer those burning questions you've always wanted to ask your favorite authors. This is a book club where we don't have to argue about what the author meant. They can tell us. The book club that doesn't require a clean house or wine and cheese. And in this book club, if you haven't read the book, it's all right. Although, we hope you'll be inspired to pick it up next time you're in the library. I'm your host, Slade Kemet, and you can consider the book club rewritten because this is Club Book. Club Book is made possible by Minnesota's Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund, MELSA, and Library Strategies, part of the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library. We would also like to thank our partnering bookseller, Red Balloon Bookshop. This podcast features Matt Goldman at Anoka County Library, Northtown. Mystery novelist Matt Goldman started his writing career as an Emmy Award-winning screenwriter and producer. Comedian Jerry Seinfeld handpicked Goldman as a founding member of the creative team behind sitcom juggernaut Seinfeld. Goldman's later television credits include work on Ellen and The New Adventures of Old Christine. Goldman published his first novel, Gone to Dust, in 2017. It launched the Minnesota set and New York Times bestselling Nils Shapiro series. The fourth and latest installment, Dead West, shifts locales to Hollywood and makes gainful use of the author's firsthand knowledge of the larger-than-life characters drawn to the limelight of show business. Goldman's newest mystery, Still Waters, is a standalone story. In it, estranged siblings Liv and Gabe Ahlstrom return to their family-run resort on Leech Lake to investigate a relative's suspicious death. Publishers Weekly notes, Goldman's fans will eat this up. Three-dimensional characters and authentic dialogue elevate the mystery premise.
Thank you, Stacey. Thank you. Thanks for coming out tonight on the last night of summer. That's what I'm saying it is. I'm declaring it's the last night of summer. I have air conditioning voice, so sorry about that. But hopefully you can hear me okay. I like to just talk a little bit, but have these things turn into conversations more than just one idiot standing up here talking. So that way, whatever questions you have, I can answer, and anything you want to discuss about writing, if in the book world or the TV world or Minnesota or process or whatever you want to talk about, we can do that. Has anyone here seen me before? That's good. I can use my old stuff. Oh no. All right, I'll get out the new stuff. No, we'll start fresh. Thanks for coming out. I was born in Rochester, Minnesota. This is where I mostly grew up. I moved a little around when I was a kid, but from the age of 11 on, I lived in the Twin Cities, and I went to the University of Minnesota, and I thought I was going to be a doctor. I was a chemistry major. I didn't take any writing classes in college. I thought I didn't need that. And then my junior year, spring of my junior year, some friends invited me to go see stand-up comedy at a place called Williams Pub, which, for those of you who remember, it was downstairs, there were peanut shells on the floor, there were comedians on the stage. I was a really quiet kid at then 21 years old. And for some reason, when I saw that stand-up comedy live, which I had never seen before, I thought I should do that. So I had to make that call to my parents. and then they were supportive. That was nice. You know, they probably thought I would fail in 5 minutes and then get back on my other track. But I started doing stand-up. It went well for me. I started working all the time. I loved the writing part of it, not the being on stage part of it. I'm a little better at that now than I was then. But I had a clean act, not because I was a prude or anything. I just wanted to be on the Tonight Show. And I didn't want to waste my time doing any material that couldn't be on The Tonight Show. And this is before the cable explosion, and it was The Tonight Show and David Letterman, that was it. So, and they would have, because of that, and I didn't cover familiar premises, they would have me open for the national acts who came through. People like Roseanne Barr and Dana Carvey and Jerry Seinfeld and Bob Saget and Louis Anderson when he was in town, and a whole bunch of people. Whenever I got off stage, they would always say the same thing: good writing, which I know what that means. But the writing is what I loved, but with a lot of encouragement. They're like, you should go to LA and write TV. And right after I turned 24, that's what I did. I just got in my dented up Ford Escort and drove west, and it worked out. And so, and part of that was because of Jerry. I opened for him here. This is well before the show was probably 86 or something like that, before the show was on. And we became friends, and we stayed friends. And then when he got a show, he asked me to work on it, and that really super launched my career in a big way. And I loved comedy because it was very human and it's about our flaws, and that's what I just really loved about everything comedy. And then things changed in TV when shows like Breaking Bad and The Sopranos and The Wire came out, House of Cards. TV started getting really good, and it was the cool thing. All of a sudden, it had always been, you want to work in film, and if you can't work in film, then work in TV. But those shows changed all that, and all of a sudden, TV was the cool it thing, but they were all dramas. All those shows were dramas, and the people who ran comedy at the networks and studios thought, we want to be cool too, so we're going to try to make cool shows. And when they did that, those shows got a little slicker and a little jokier and a little less human, and I started to lose interest in working on them. And I thought, you know what? I'm mostly watching dramas. I think I'm gonna shift to drama. And to do that, to do some research, I started reading crime fiction. And I'd always been a big reader. I'd always want to write books, but I was kind of a literary fiction snob I was working on Wizards of Waverly Place at one point. There was no business for me to be a snob about anything. And, but I started reading crime fiction, and I just fell in love with it, because it had exactly what I was missing from the way comedy was going, which is when you have a crime at the center of your story, there's kind of a built-in engine to the story. And it frees up space for your characters to just be people. It gets back to a very human thing, which I was not expecting, when I was not expecting it at all. And I just kind of fell in love with it. And I devoured the genre for a few years. And by the time I felt I was ready to write a drama, I just sat down and wrote my first book. It was 2015. I was between shows. I was splitting my time between here and Los Angeles. Both of my kids had just gone back to their second semesters of college. I was sitting in my little house in Minneapolis. It was 11 below out. That's without wind chill, which they call feels like now. But it's wind chill, we know it. It's like with flatbreads, they're pizzas. You just can't change the name of them and put corners on them and say they're a different food. They're not. And I had this 4-month thing, and I sat down and I wrote a book that is called Gone to Dust. And I wrote that in 3.5 months, and it changed my life. I wrote that book. I did not tell my Hollywood agents about it at all, because I thought somehow they'll put their stink on it. They'll wreck it. They'll try to make it into a TV show before it's a movie. Before it's a book. They'll try to change things to draw a certain actor's interest. And so I didn't even let them know I wrote it. I blind queried, is a term when you just send out a little query to agents in New York. and said, hey, I'm this guy, I wrote this book, do you want to see it? And a few of them did, and that's how it got published. And I'm glad I did it that way. I have a friend named Hart Hansen. Hart is, you might not know his name, but he's another television writer who created a show called Bones. It's a great show, and he's a great writer. And our first novels came out within a week of each other in 2017. And he used his Hollywood people who leveraged this giant deal for him. And by deal, I could also call them expectations. So there were these huge expectations for his book, and none for mine, because I went the normal way. And I don't know his sales numbers, and I can't really read the spreadsheets that tell me mine. I'm not capable of it. But based on our Amazon rankings and our Goodreads reviews and other reviews, and I think those books were equally well received. And his book didn't even go into paperback. And mine led to a second book, and then a fourth book, then 4 books, and now I just agreed, like in 2.5 years, I will have had 12 books come out by then. So, and he just had a second book come out, and I have not had the nerve to ask him who did the deal for it. But it's called Seminarian, and he's a great writer, so I advise checking it out. But anyway, so I worked for a few more years in television, and then my kids graduated from college, and the show I was working on did not get picked up, and this was at the beginning of end of 2017, right after Gone to Dust had just come out, and I just thought, think I'm going to be done with TV and just go write books and see what happens. And it's been great. I've written the first book, Gone to Dust, features a private detective named Nils Shapiro, and I wrote 3 more of those books. There's 4 books in that series. And then my publisher said, we want to see a standalone from you, because those were very popular. It goes in cycles, and standalones are kind of the thing, unless you're Lee Child. And and although Ken Kruger does both, he writes, which is great. And so I wrote a book called Carolina Moonset, and that book, fortunately and unfortunately, did very well. I only say unfortunately because they're like, we don't need to see any more Nils books. Keep doing standalones. But don't worry, because that is how I feel too. And it's the #1 question I get at events like this. It's the most common email I get from readers from all over the place. When is Nils coming back? When is Nils coming back? And I can tell you, now I know some things for sure. Next year I have a book coming out called The Murder Show. It's not a Nils book, but he's in 3 chapters of it. And it sets up his return. A book which is titled Dark Humor, which is written now, but I'm not sure when it's coming out. And the reason I don't want to bore you too much with publishing business thing, but I've been at Forge, which is an imprint of Macmillan, which is one of the big 5. They have different imprints. And my editor, I just found out a few months ago, is leaving, has now left Forge, and is going to Minotaur, which is another imprint of Macmillan. So it's kind of a friendly move. And I'm going with her. But Minotaur doesn't want to do more Nils books because they're from the old imprint. So I've already had some interest, but there will be a different publisher for that Nils book, and I'm not sure exactly when it's coming out, but I think it'll be in 2025, I think. But it's written, so yeah. But it might be also 2026, and I can tell you why. I have 2 books coming out next year. That are not the Nils book. That's why I'm a little confused.
With that, we have reached the part of our podcast where we turn to our Club Book audience for questions and comments for Matt Goldman and his work. In this book club, we like to encourage members and authors to connect and engage and help bridge the gap between the page you read and the process it took to write it. Our first question of the night comes from an audience member wondering what the first crime fiction book Matt Goldman read that may have piqued his interest in writing in the genre.
I don't know which one I read first. It might have been a Joe Nesbo book. He's a Norwegian writer, for anybody who doesn't know. He kind of on the dark side, but writes character really well. But the writer who made me think I should give it a shot is Raymond Chandler. And the reason is because Chandler, maybe you haven't read a Raymond Chandler book, or maybe you haven't for a very long time. He's considered one of the godfathers of American noir. But his detective, Philip Marlowe, narrates the books in a quite witty voice, kind of a wry voice, some wonderful social observation. And at the time, when I was I wasn't even thinking I should write those books, but when I read Chandler, I thought, oh, I have this 25 years of comedy writing. I've developed this voice, and I can't write as well as Chandler, but I can use my voice to tell a comedic voice to tell a serious story. That's really what lit it up for me, was Chandler.
This audience member asks what Goldman's writing process looks like.
First of all, I credit being able to write quickly to two things: having a Midwestern work ethic and a TV writer's work ethic. Because in TV, you have to get it done. I mean, and you have to fix it when it's broken and get it as good as you can, because it's going to get shot and put on the air pretty soon. And so, but I do, and I usually go by a word count. So a lot of writers go by time. I go by word count. And so that can take me anywhere from 3 hours to 12 hours, depending on how the day's going. I will start writing, and I like to have a little simmering process. Like today, I had that idea last night, like shortly before I went to bed. So you never can trust those ideas. But then I woke up this morning and it felt good, and then like the first scene popped into my head. And so I will probably just make notes for a few weeks until I can't stand it anymore, and then but I don't outline. I do not outline. The reason I don't outline is that we had to outline in television, and I have written on over 500 episodes of TV. My name, it doesn't say written by Matt Goldman on all of them, but I was one of the writers taking it from a one-line idea to a one-page idea to an outline to several drafts of the scripts. And by the way, so many drafts of outlines, like so many drafts, and to where everybody, studio, network, all the writers thought it was good, and then the writer would go write a script faithful to that outline, and almost every single time, I'm not kidding, 99% of the time, the script didn't work. And it's because the part of our brains we use to make an outline is different than the part of our brains that create real characters. So you have this like outlines are logical. This happens, this happens, this happens. It's like making a shopping list, this, this, this. But if you create three-dimensional characters, if they feel like real people, if they behave consistently, it's really hard to hammer them into like an exoskeletal story shape. I hope this isn't too businessy talky, but if you ever are watching TV or reading a book or watching a movie and a character says, well, I can't believe I'm going to say this, but it's because they're acting completely out of character to fit a story. And I like to let them bubble up from the inside out. And I know plenty of good writers who do outline. I know Kent Kruger outlines his Cork O'Connor books, but not his standalones. And but then most of them say the same thing. I write the outline, but then it all changes. And then I'm like, well, then why do I write the outline? And so it's also fun for me as a writer to not know what's going to happen next. It's almost like the same excitement as a reader has. And I can't remember who said it. It wasn't Stephen King, but I think he quoted it. What writer said, it's like driving a car at night. Your headlights show you what's in front of you, and that's all you need to know to drive at night. You don't need to know about the next 10 bends that come until you get to them. I don't know where I'm getting. There is a point in the book that I get to where I think, okay, I think I know where this is going to go. And usually it does, but sometimes it doesn't. Because I really try to, I know it sounds weird, but listen to the characters and who they are and what they would and would not do. But I have to say, I could not have done that if I hadn't worked on all those episodes of TV. Story, I think, was the hardest thing for me to learn. It's the thing I learned last. I think character and dialogue came more easily to me. And so, but once I kind of learned it, then now it's in me. And you know, I have kind of a simple philosophy, which is try not to be boring. And it does help. Like, I try to keep those characters moving and start them in motion, set them on conflicting paths, and see what happens. And then in rewrites, it looks like I had a much more organized approach. Yeah. It's amazing how little I know when I start. But I do, but what happens is I'll write 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 hours a day, and then the rest of the day, my brain doesn't turn off. I'm just walking the dogs and thinking about it, or go fishing and think about it. And so the ideas come at different times, but I've just been through it enough times now and over enough, you know, I started as a stand-up when I was 21, writing my own material, so I've been doing it for 40 years. And I started pretty early. I started writing episodes of television. So I've just now learned to trust that I'll probably figure it out, or have to go make some changes, yeah. In the book that comes out next year, The Murder Show, it's actually about a TV showrunner who has had a show called The Murder Show on for 3 seasons. It's on the bubble whether he's going to get a 4th season. There's a point to me telling you this, don't worry. And he has to go pitch that 4th season, and then the writer's strike happens, which just happened. So I said it during that writer's strike. And he's from here, and he comes back, and he gets involved in an investigation with a friend of his. A friend of theirs died the summer after high school, and it was a hit and run, and that friend is now a cop, and she thinks it was murder, and she says, you can use this for your show, just help me look into it. It's out of her jurisdiction, so she can't do it officially. So, but I explain a lot of the writing process, and you don't know. It's like if you're in a long-term relationship, if you go back to the beginning and you thought, oh, this is going to work great, it's just luck if it does. And it's kind of the same. I mean, I have a lot of experience now because of all those TV stories and now a number of books, that you just trust you're going to have the skill, the craft to make it work. But I've written 20,000 words of a book and thought, I don't, and I've just thrown it out. That's happened before. But I've never written 80,000 and thrown it out. Well, that's not true. I did once. But I still think that book has a chance. I just haven't revived it yet.
This question is if any of Goldman's works have been optioned for Hollywood.
Yes, there has been some optioning, but nothing has happened yet. And I'm not pushing it at all. I have not got to that point where I'm really trying to make something happen. If I really wanted them to be TV shows or movies, I would write them as that. I'm really quite happier in the book world. And I would like it to happen because I'll sell more books. But I really, I've had my name on the screen. I've had all the big Hollywood experiences, and I'm not most of the other authors I know get very excited about, oh, this is going to happen, that somebody optioned my thing, and I don't want to tell them that means nothing at all. Like you can't. It's a long process, and but maybe it'll happen. Yeah.
Our next question is about Goldman's favorite author to read.
Oh, I don't know if I have a most favorite. I have favorites who I get very excited about whenever they have a new book out. And I read in and out of the genre. So I'm a big Ann Patchett fan, like huge. I'm a big James McBride fan. I'm going to blank on names. I always do this when I get asked. Kate Atkinson, who writes mostly in the genre, but not always. She has a Jackson Brody series that's she's quite funny, really funny. I had never read John Le Carré before the pandemic, and then I read a bunch of those books, and I don't care about the spy stuff at all, really, but I love his writing so much, and his characters so much that I read that. And then I have people like Anthony Horowitz I generally read that's pretty light, and I just read I hate to say anything bad about a book, but I just read a book I didn't love that much by Richard Osman, who I do generally love, but I didn't love his new book as much, but I think everybody else likes it because it's doing just fine. Once in a while I read a book and I'm like, I'm the only one who doesn't like it. But there was a book a couple years, Paul Murray, The Bee Sting, that book. Did anybody read that? And I didn't like it as much as it was getting a lot of attention, so I felt bad. But so it's a pretty big list of authors. There's local authors, Kent Kruger, Mindy Mejia, Alan Eskins.
This Club Book audience member asks how Goldman came up with the idea of Gone to Dust.
Gone to Dust. For anyone who doesn't know, this isn't giving anything away. It's how the book starts. Someone is found murdered in Edina. Hold your applause. I haven't got to do that joke for a long time. I got very excited right before I said it because I was a chance to use it. And anyway, her body and most of the house are covered in the dust and dirt from hundreds of vacuum cleaner bags. And so to isolate any forensic evidence in there's so much hair and fiber and DNA. It's like it can't be solved in the lab. So I came up for that there's two reasons I came up with that. The kind of joke way, but it is also real, is I was always trying to come up with ideas that the CSI team on TV could not solve. Because I found that show to be very unrealistic, and I'm like, I just want to come up with crimes they can't solve, and then the show would be 5 minutes long, that episode. But the real reason I came up with a crime that couldn't be solved in the lab is I needed this police department, and I made it in Edina. When I wrote that, no one had been murdered there for decades. Sadly, that became not true last year, and so I needed an inexperienced police department, so they would bring on a consultant, which is so I could introduce my PI to my readers. And I also wanted a crime that couldn't be solved in the lab, so that my PI, Nils, would have to draw on his personal life to gain insight into the investigation. And I wanted to do that so that we would get to know Nils in a really organic way. And because I'm a big believer, as fun and interesting and riveting as the crimes can be in these books, we come back for the characters. And that's true in books, it's true in TV, I think it's true in films as well. And so that's why I came up with that. By the way, that original title for that book got changed. And I was a new writer, so I didn't fight it too much. The original name was Dirtbag, which I think is a better title, right? And they had a good reason for wanting to change it. They thought people would think, oh, Nils is a dirtbag. but it's still a better title. I still think people would have picked that off the shelf more readily. So I'm going to tell them you said so.
Our next question is if Matt Goldman gets to have a say in the voice actor used for his audiobooks.
I listen to the first chapter because that's how they audition, and then once it's done, it's done. And I'm afraid I'm going to hear something I want to change, so I don't listen to it. But there has been a mispronunciation problem that is getting me more frustrated. I don't think it was too bad in Still Waters. But the book before, A Good Family, I had to make them go back and change some things. They usually check in with me about pronunciations, and they didn't that time. But yes, I do have some say. We were just talking before. I'm getting to the point where I want to go be in the booth with them while they're recording it. So, like my 8th and 9th books are coming out next year. I still have more experience working with actors than I do writing novels. And so I kind of want to be in there, but it also sounds kind of boring.
Have you thought of doing it?
No, I don't think I'm talented enough to do it. I could, if it were nonfiction and I was just reading, but if I have to do a bunch of different character voices, I don't think, I think they would, I could maybe do 1 or 2, and then the next one, you would say, doesn't that person sound exactly like the other person? Authors do read their own books sometimes. Oh, Donna Tartt, that's an author I love also, who isn't in the crime fiction genre, but all of her books are crime fiction. But, and she's really about due for a book, because she's once every 10 years. But the reason I bring that up is she narrated A Secret History. And she has a very high, little, tiny voice, and I thought, this isn't gonna work, but it worked really well.
This fan inquires about Goldman's standalone books and what genres those fall into.
Yeah, I have considered books in a totally different genre. Next year, I have a book coming out that's a historical novel that is called The Prohibited, that I wrote in 2019. It has some crime in it, but it's really not what it's about. I wrote it, I showed it to my publisher, they made an offer on it, and I turned it down because of 2 reasons. Not because of the money, because I thought there's not enough crime in this, and I don't want them to like add extra crime that's just gonna mess it up. And my agent said, we'll have no problem finding another publisher for this book. She really loves it. And we had a problem finding another publisher for the book. It got so close at Knopf and Doubleday and places like that. And she's like, I'm not giving up, I'm not giving up. And I was doing an event like this last year, and I didn't know it, but the managing editor of the University of Minnesota Press was in the audience. And this kind of, somehow I mentioned the book, and she asked if they could read it, and now they're publishing it. And which I'm really excited about. 1, it's my alma mater, and 2, they have a wonderful reputation for fiction, which is unusual for a university press. And they make really physically beautiful books. So yeah, but I do have ideas that are out of the genre, and some books are more crimey than others. And so I started a book a couple weeks ago that is set in southeast Minnesota that will be my first Minotaur book. And it starts with a missing person, but it's really more about the town and the characters, and so it's not as like dead body on page 1 and private investigators and cops are around. Yeah.
This question is about how many books Goldman is working on at any given time.
Really only work on 1 at a time. That might change. I started working on this new book, and then I got I can't even remember all the names they have for the different drafts, But for the murder show, which is coming out in April, they sent me it's still a digital file, but it's laid out like a book, and it's kind of my last chance to go over it. So I had to push my new book aside and spend 5-6 days going over that. And now I'm back in. But then last night, I'm telling you all my personal problems. Last night, I had an idea for a new series that I think is really, really good. And I don't know if I can wait to write it. I don't know what I'm going to do. Yeah.
Don't wait, do it.
Yeah. Oh, I'll tell you guys what it is, and then you can tell me if you think it's good. And you can also I'm not going to tell you. All right, go ahead. Because I won't be able. Okay, I'll tell you. So it's these 3 or 4 stay-at-home dads who gave up their careers when they were young for various reasons, stayed home and raised their kids, and their kids just went off to college and they don't know what to do with themselves. And they get caught and they end up starting a detective agency. That's it. Domestic Dad's Detective. That's it. So very character-based. Kind of fun, right?
Yeah.
So, all right.
Do it.
Yeah, all right, I'll do it. I'm going to call my agent tomorrow and say, they said, yeah, so I don't know. I really want to write that. Like the characters are just coming fast and yeah.
Our next question is about Goldman's relationship with his editor and how editors help shape books.
We do have a nice working relationship. I find it a way more constructive relationship than most of the writer-executive relationships I had in Hollywood. I always say that my editor and my agent in the book world, they're in the boat rowing with me. So they want to get to where I want to get to. And so most of the notes I get from them are minor, but some of it, can we hear a little bit more about this or go a little deeper here? Because I tend to pace my books almost too quickly sometimes. But I don't, and by the way, because I've had such horrible experiences as every television writer has and movie writer, with executives, I find my editor's comments to be super light and but constructive and have a point. And I take most of her notes, so she thinks I'm like a very easy writer to work with. Because I think a lot of writers, especially in the beginning, they feel that everything they write is so precious, they don't want to change it. Or they put time into it. Like I've thrown out whole sections of books I've spent a week on. But it's because just because I put the work in, I have this theory of life that I'll share with you that at 61 years of age I've developed, and I got to give it to a character in a book quite soon. But if you spend $10 on a sandwich and you eat half of it and it gives you diarrhea, should you eat the other half just because you spent $5 on it? So. That's my theory of life. And so just because I spent a week working on something, if it doesn't make the book better, you gotta let it go. So, but I'm not in those meetings with those other writers and their editors, but sometimes writers get too successful and they won't listen to editors anymore.
This audience member asks about Goldman's research process.
Yeah, research. I do as much research as I have to, and I try not to do more. And the reason is that if I do a lot of research, I'm worried I'll feel like I'll have to put it in the book, and that'll slow down the story, which is exactly, in my second book, Broken Ice, someone gets shot by a broadhead arrow, those arrows that look like razor blades. And I did a lot of research about those things and how they wound and kill, hopefully animals. But not that I want animals to get killed, but just not people. And so I try to do the research I need to do. In my first standalone Carolina Moonset, one of the main characters has Lewy body dementia. I knew about that because my father had it. And so, and I wrote his voice in it, but I also did, like I didn't know if his symptoms were typical or kind of outlier symptoms for somebody with that diagnosis. So I do research. I just try to not get stuff wrong. And once in a while I still do, but I don't do heavy research. And it's why I don't write police procedurals, because I don't love those. I find they get too technical. And you really hear about it if you get it wrong. Someone like Michael Connolly, who was a police reporter for 30 years, really knows his stuff. Or somebody like Kathy Reichs, who was a forensic investigator or forensic anthropologist. They already really know it. But I don't want to overdo it with research. Yeah.
Our last question of the night comes from an audience member wondering if Matt Goldman can share a little bit about his upcoming historical period piece.
1922, it's set in St. Paul and the Upper Peninsula and a tiny bit of Chicago, Upper Peninsula of Michigan. It's about 3 adult brothers who lose their liquor store to Prohibition, which my great-grandfather did. And none of them became bootleggers, which is very disappointing in my personal life. But one of their sons still feels entitled to be in the liquor business, and there's a little bit of crime that way. But the kind of research I did was about Prohibition. I found out that there were loopholes. Doctors could sell whiskey, a pint a week, I think, basically for anxiety. And they had to be in these special bottles with government labels on it. Priests and rabbis could sell sacramental wine to families used for religious purposes, 2 bottles a week. Everybody in St. Paul in 1922 knew who the priests were. Nobody knew who the rabbis were. So one of the brothers becomes a rabbi all of a sudden, and he's selling sacramental wine. And so I did learn about that. The book's more about like the 19th Amendment and the 18th Amendment clashing inside a home. This man who just lost his liquor store is feeling somewhat emasculated as his wife just campaigned hard to get women's right to vote, and there's more equality in theory out in the world, but certainly not in the home, and so there's a real conflict there. And that's kind of, there's more going on than that in the book, but that's really at its heart. Yeah. Oh, thank you. Thanks for coming.
That wraps up our Anoka County Library event with Matt Goldman. Make sure to catch our next podcast with Jane Ann Phillips. Jane Ann Phillips has been a defining voice in American literature for nearly half a century. Her unforgettable fiction gives voice to the downtrodden, marginalized, and forgotten. Her latest novel, Civil War and Reconstruction period piece, Night Watch, won the 2024 Pulitzer Prize for Fiction. Visit us online at clubbook.org for details on past and present seasons, sign up for our e-newsletter, check out our calendar, and so much more. Stay up to date with all of our events at our Club Book Facebook page. If you're on Twitter, find us using the handle ClubBookMN. And if you enjoy these free Club Book events and podcasts, remember to share them with your friends. They just may too. Thanks again to all those who make Club Book possible, including Melsa, Library Strategies, and Minnesota's Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. Our sponsors include Red Balloon Bookshop, where you can purchase all the books featured in Club Book. Finally, a very special thank you to all the libraries hosting events this season. That's it for Club Book, the coolest club in town. We'll see you at the library.